The grand amphitheater of the galactic conclave hummed with a low, discordant energy. It was the final round of the Universal Arts Gala, a millennium-old tradition meant to showcase the pinnacle of cultural achievement across the stars. The air was thick with the pheromones of anticipation from the insectoid judges of the Kavix hive, the subtle color shifts of the aquatic Galathea assessors, and the impatient tapping of stony digits from the mineral-bound Lithians. On stage, wonders had unfolded. A Galathea chorus had sculpted sound into visible, shimmering liquid harmonies. A Lithian composer had played a symphony on tuned crystals that made the very bones of the audience resonate. The Kavix had presented a telepathic scent drama, a complex story experience as a cascade of emotions and aromas. Humanity's entry, a virtuoso violinist from the Martian Conservatory, had been technically flawless, profoundly moving by human standards. The judges had awarded polite, muted praise. It was, they implied with delicate phrasing, a commendable effort for a young species. Now a hush fell. The final participant was called. A human female walked onto the vast stage. She was slight, her posture straight but unassuming. Her name was Alara. She wore simple clothes, a dark tunic and trousers. In the glittering alien spectacle of the gala, she seemed a shadow. Her instrument, a large, oddly shaped case of polished wood, was wheeled in behind her by two silent attendants. The head judge, a venerable Kavix with iridescent wings, fluttered its mandibles. You are the secondary human entry. State your artistic discipline. Alara looked at the judge, then at the thousands of alien eyes upon her. She did not speak. She merely gave a small, shallow bow. A murmur circulated. Was she mute? Was this a performance piece about silence? The human delegation in their small, assigned quadrant shifted uneasily. Their ambassador, a man named David, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Alara was a last-minute, almost clandestine addition, insisted upon by a faction of historians, not artists. Her file was sparse. She was a restorer, a keeper of archives, hardly a performer. Alara opened the case. Within, nestled in warm velvet, was an object of strange beauty. A complex construction of wood, wire, and ivory keys. A concert grand piano. To the aliens, it was a primitive contraption, a box of hammers and strings. They had seen human string instruments. This seemed overly mechanical. She positioned herself on the bench, her back to the audience, facing the open lid and the forest of strings within. Her hands rested in her lap. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. The Galathea judges began to pulse with mild irritation. The Kavix antennae twitched. Then Alara moved. Her back remained straight, but her shoulders softened. She lifted her hands, and they hovered above the keys for a heartbeat that seemed to stop time in the amphitheater. And then she began to play Dot. It was not the piece anyone expected. It was not a thundering concerto or a delicate sonata. It was a simple, ancient melody, a folk tune from a place called Earth, predating spaceflight, predating even widespread global unity. The notes were clean, pure, each one a perfect droplet of sound in the vast quiet. The melody was one of longing, of a lonely road under a wide sky. It was stark. It was unadorned. The judges listened with analytical detachment. The technique was evident, the control absolute. The emotion was quaint, a simple species-specific nostalgia. But Alara did not stop. The simple melody began to change. It was the same sequence of notes, but she played it again with a different pressure, a subtle shift in rhythm. Now it sounded like the same road, but walked with a heavier heart. She played it a third time, the notes softer, slower, evoking not loneliness, but a quiet, profound peace. She was demonstrating not just the notes, but the spaces between them. The silence became part of the music. Then she transitioned. Her left hand began a deep, rolling pattern like distant thunder, a foundational tremor. Over this, her right hand wove a new melody. This was not ancient. This was the sound of a storm over an ocean, of chaos and raw power. The piano was no longer a box of hammers. It was a force of nature. The bass notes vibrated through the amphitheater floor, a physical sensation the Lithians felt in their crystalline cores. The Galathi saw the sound as dark, crashing waves in their mind's eye. As abruptly as it built, the storm subsided, dissolving into a series of arpeggios that glittered like sunlight on rain-swept pavement. Elara's face remained a mask of serene concentration, but her hands were a blur of independent motion. Now she played a piece of joyous, almost impossible complexity. It was a dance of intellect and spirit, a celebration of pure pattern and joyful energy. It was the sound of a city, of a civilization in motion, of laughter and discovery. The judges were now still, utterly still. The Kavix had stopped processing scent data. The Galathi's color shifts had frozen. They were no longer assessing. They were receiving. Elara moved again, without pause, into the next movement. This was different. This was slow, achingly so. Each chord was a world of feeling. This was the sound of memory, of loss that was not sharp, but deep and worn smooth by time. It was the sound of love that persisted beyond absence. It was universal. The Lithian judge, whose species measured time in geologic epochs, felt a resonance with the memory of mountains. The Galathi felt the deep, cold currents of their home oceans. The Kavix, for the first time, perceived a telepathic emotion not broadcast, but evoked within themselves, a longing for the hive queen of their larval past. She hardly spoke, but her piano was speaking in a language older than words, a language of vibration, of mathematics made emotion, of physics made soul. The final section began. Elara combined it all. The simple folk melody returned, but now it was woven into the fabric of the storm, the joyful dance, the profound lament. It was no longer just a human song. It was the story of a species. Its solitude on a pale blue dot, its struggle against its own nature and its environment, its bursts of terrible violence and sublime creation, its yearning for the stars. The piano under her hands became a starship, a laboratory, a cathedral, a battlefield, a cradle. The music swelled, a tidal wave of collective experience, of billions of lives, of hope and fear, triumph and failure. And then it culminated, not in a crashing, dissonant chord, but in a resolution so pure, so simple, that it brought a shock of silence more profound than any noise. A single clean interval hung in the air, a note, and its perfect fifth. It was a question and an answer. It was Earth and its moon. It was home and the journey away from it. The sound faded into the perfect acoustics of the amphitheater. Elara lowered her hands. She sat for a moment in the ringing quiet, then slowly closed the fallboard over the keys. She stood, turned to face the judges and the audience, and gave the same small, shallow bow. For a long moment, there was nothing. No applause, no telepathic buzz, no shifting of forms. The entire assembly was caught in the aftermath, the emotional inertia of the journey she had wrought. Then, the Lithian judge, in a movement that sounded like grinding granite, raised one massive hand and brought it down on its own crystalline torso. A single clear chime resonated through the silence. It was a gesture of deep respect, their version of a standing ovation. One by one, the Galathi began to luminesce, not in their patterns of assessment, but in a slow, deep blue pulse of profound understanding. The Kavix judges as one folded their wings and bowed their heads, their antennae drooping in a posture of total, overwhelmed reception. The human ambassador, David, found he could not stand. He was weeping quietly, not for pride, but for a truth he had never fully grasped until now. He had heard the history of his people, but Elara had made him feel its weight, its beauty, its terrible cost. Elara walked off the stage as quietly as she had entered. The judges did not confer. They did not need to. The scoring monitors remained blank. Numbers were an insult to what had just transpired. When the head judge finally spoke, its telepathic voice was hushed, transmitted to every mind in the amphitheater. We came to judge art. We have been judged by it. We sought technical mastery. We encountered a soul. The song of humanity is not a song of conquest. It is the song of the lonely road, the endured storm, the joyful discovery, and the memory of home. It is formidable. A title was not awarded that cycle. The conclave records simply state that in the final round, a demonstration by the human species rendered standard metrics obsolete. The event is cited in xenopsychological texts as the human resonance. Back in the preparation room, Elara was carefully wiping down the piano's keys. David entered, his face still wet. Elara, that was... I have no words. She looked at him, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. She still did not speak. She simply placed a hand gently on the piano's smooth wood, as if soothing a living thing. The instrument that had just contained multitudes, once again, just a box of wood, wire, and felt. But the silence in the room was different now. It was a silence that remembered music. It was a silence that knew, finally, what humanity was.